You can't operate a data-driven product the way you operate most SaaS products. The thing about data-driven products, what you're really selling is the ability to uncover meaningful insights from this company's data. The only way to get to that aha moment is for them to actually see what it does on their data. The damage you can make to your reputation by faking personalization outweighs by a lot the value that you get from automation. So I think companies should tread lightly and understand where are we really augmenting reps and empowering them to be better sellers versus when are we almost like tricking our prospects into believing there's something to the point where at some point we're going to realize the emperor is naked, and that's going to be a rude awakening.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends, and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov, and today I'm excited to have Francis Brero, co-founder and CPO at MadKudu. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi Francis.
Hey Oleg, thanks for having me.
Let's start our podcast with a little blitz. I start the sentence and you continue.
Okay, sounds good.
Entrepreneurship gave me
gray hair.
Entrepreneurship deprived me
Of sleep.
My main superpower is
Patience.
My main weakness is
Underestimating how technical I am and what the barrier is to doing the same thing.
Could you walk us through the story of co-founding MadKudu? What market gap are you aiming to fill?
I think we were aiming to fill a big gap in a lot of organizations that are not large enterprises, where companies are sitting on a lot of data, but they don't really have the resources internally to analyze it, understand what go-to-market decisions they should drive off of that. And as someone with a background in data science, I felt like there was an opportunity to bring a product or a solution that helped companies make the right decisions based on data. And I think it's also maybe a little bit philosophical, where I think there's a lot of disconnect in the world that is linked to the fact that we are not looking at the same data. We don't have a curated and shared perspective of truth. And that leads to a lot of misalignment within organizations and outside of organizations. So we were looking to solve that problem.
What advice would you give to first-time founders about choosing the right partner?
The main one is not underestimating what it means to find a co-founder. I think it's a really big decision. So I would highly recommend doing dry runs, actually building something together initially, and potentially even trying to sell it. It will happen very frequently that you work really well with someone when everything is going up and to the right. But then when you start getting into questions of like, oh, what happens if we sell? What happens if it doesn't go well? Trying very early on to test how you operate as co-founders in those harder situations is something that I highly recommend doing, because the last thing you want to have happen is you co-found something with someone and you realize 4, 5, 7 years down the line that you have a complete misalignment as to what you're looking for and what the rightful exit is. So on our end, one of the things that we did with my co-founder, when we started the company, we actually explicitly shared what it is that we were looking for in the entrepreneurial adventure. We wrote it in envelopes that we closed and sealed. And it's kind of our alignment on like, this is the truth that we aligned on when we started. And it's something that we don't ever want to break. And it's kind of like the thing that one of us can always bring out and say, hey, like, remember, this is what we told ourselves we would do. And then getting to that kind of alignment is pretty critical.
Interesting. I've never heard about similar approach before. What's the biggest misconception founders have about building data-driven SaaS products?
I think the biggest misconception is that you can't operate a data-driven product the way you operate most SaaS products. There's a lot of products where you can sell on a demo or you can sell on a trial version that has some limited accessibility. The thing about data-driven products, like what you're really selling is the ability to uncover meaningful insights from this company's data. The only way to get to that aha moment is for them to actually see what it does on their data. And so it's very different from a Figma. You can sell Figma to someone by just showing them the interface, like how things work and how quickly you can build on top of it. You can't sell data-driven insights. Gartner doesn't sell without giving you insights. So you have to think about building your go-to-market motion and staffing your company with in mind the fact that you're probably going to have to run pilots. You're going to have to run POCs with your customers. And you can't do the typical PLG motion of just like, you get either a trial or a freemium model and then you convert.
What emerging SaaS trends are you personally most excited about?
I think probably like many people, I'm very excited about the AI agentic workflows. We're seeing a big evolution and push away from just providing insights to actually powering autonomous agents. A big component of that is having composable platforms that can integrate with different systems to feed holistic insights to these different agents. And I think what's really exciting about it is that it operates as a forcing function to really be diligent and deliberate about what we are trying to accomplish. When you're trying to create, let's say, an AI SDR, so like you're trying to automate the ability to reach out to prospects and to close them, this requires having a very clear understanding of what are the different ways to pitch your value proposition to different personas. And I really like the fact that it forces a systemic approach to problems that historically we've kind of thrown people at the problem, hoping that they could find local solutions rather than thinking about, instead of solving it locally, how do we solve the problem globally in a systemic manner? And I think the agentic workflows are forcing us to think that way.
What's something most companies get wrong when trying to automate or personalize their prospecting workflows?
I think they over-index on automation and they under-invest in relevance. That's probably the biggest mistake that I see companies make. They just automate for the sake of automating and having more volume being done. You'll typically see that with then receiving emails that kind of all look the same. This is kind of like the baseline mistake that they make. I think the consequence is really massive because you can burn your brand reputation by faking relevance and faking personalization. So I think spending a lot of time and like doing things that don't scale, thinking about what is the perfect almost email that I would want to send it 5 times. And then from there, start deriving how do you create a process to automate that rather than thinking about what is the simplest thing I can automate it, and then kind of set and forget. I think too many people go down that route rather than spending the time and the cycles to actually create automation that is going to be helpful and valuable for the person receiving it.
How do you balance automation with human touch in sales? Where should AI stop and the salesperson start?
I think that's a good question. And it is, that limit is constantly shifting. I think today we are in a place where automation and AI should really be augmenting sellers and not replacing them. So there's a lot of tasks that require a lot of data processing, data analysis. Those kind of things can be automated because it helps the rep focus on what they do best, which is interacting with humans, having empathy with their problem. And I think one of the biggest things is that the AI and the automation should be designed to help the rep be more trustworthy rather than put reps in a situation where we faked some level of understanding of the problem to the point where we could completely burn them when they end up booking a meeting. It's a tangent, but there's something happening in the music industry that's pretty interesting right now. There's this one guitar player, Giacomo Tura, who's been caught basically faking all of his performances on Instagram. And essentially he got a ton of followers on Instagram, but then people would book him to come play on TV or at a venue and they would realize that he couldn't play. And this is like very similar to SDRs who kind of tell you, oh, I read this amazing blog post that you wrote, really like what it says and blah, blah, blah. But then if the meeting is actually booked and the SDR is in front of that person who wrote the blog article and they can't talk about it, the meeting is over. This company is burned forever. I think the damage you can make to your reputation by faking personalization outweighs by a lot the value that you get from automation. So I think companies should tread lightly and understand where are we really augmenting reps and empowering them to be better sellers versus when are we almost like tricking our prospects into believing there's something, to the point where at some point we're going to realize the emperor is naked, and that's going to be a rude awakening.
AI-powered products come with unique challenges and ethics, data privacy and transparency. How do you navigate those issues as a CPO?
It's all about starting with where you want to play, having core principles that you stick to in your product design. From our perspective, I think at MadKudu at least, we are very focused on transparency, which can be difficult because if you use any kind of LLMs or black box models, they're non-deterministic. So it's very hard to understand what's going on behind the scenes. But creating as much transparency as possible by exposing what are the prompts, what is the data that's being fed into the LLM is really critical to make sure that people have as much control and that they could have. And then you have the typical making sure that you have the right kind of consent and control over the data that's being fed into those systems and making sure that you have guardrails to prevent any kind of bias or harmful outcomes. Those are baseline, I guess, elements. But then there's a question of how much of your product do you want it to feel like magic and how much of it do you want to feel like a more deterministic system. And I think that's, again, it's something that people have to navigate because it changes the experience of your product with AI.
Where do you see AI-driven sales enablement heading in the next few years?
It is a good question. It's a hard question to answer. If we look at the trends, we're going to a world where a lot of the sales motions are going to be agent operated. So we're going to have agents that operate across a lot of different systems and not just within one tool. It's going to go from agents that can deliver insights to agents who can take actions, booking meetings, personalizing emails, reaching out, following up, all that kind of stuff. I think this is like order one change. I think when we think about like second order and third order changes, that's when it gets a lot harder to predict, the same way that when the car industry started, it was easy to predict that there were going to be gas stations. What was harder to predict was how the event of cars shaped the way we designed our cities. And I think there's something here with AI-driven sales might actually change dramatically the way we purchase, because if now every email we receive from a vendor is AI generated, we're probably going to start building our own AI agents to analyze those emails and determine if it is relevant or not and reply accordingly. And then we end up in a scenario where we basically have two adversarial networks who are communicating together to try and figure out how to get budget. And we're already starting to see this. I think like Thomas Tongus wrote an article about this recently where he was saying that there's this company called Neon that is seeing a surge in the amount of signups for their database because it seems to be the preferred option for some of the LLMs. And so when people are developing, or when they're vibe coding and Cursor, Windsurf, all of those, when the agent has to decide what kind of database to use, it kind of defaults to that one, which is super interesting because we're getting to a point where almost like procurement and the decision on what backend database you're starting to use is being outsourced to an LLM. So we're already starting to get there where your local code editor is making some of these purchase decisions for you. So it's not that crazy to think that we are going to get into a world where Superhuman or whatever kind of email tool you use is going to be able to filter and respond to emails automatically to protect your inbox. And then the vendors are going to do the same thing. And email servers are just going to implode from that volume of back and forth between these AI agents.
That sounds too magical to me. Are there specific regions or countries that you find particularly promising for tech talent?
I am French, so I have strong belief in Europe. I know the quality of the engineers that come out of the French engineering schools. And we see a lot of them, right? Like Yann Lequin at Meta. I mean, he's like pioneer in the AI. He's French, like he brought a lot of top French graduates into the US. With the current political landscape, I think it is going to foster a setup where a lot of people are going to stay in Europe rather than come to the US to drive innovation. So I do think that Europe is very promising from that standpoint. I think when I look at Latin America, we have a lot of folks from Latin America. There's a very good level of grit. They are very smart people. And fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, they're very undervalued, especially in the US. I find that not every recruiter, not every hiring manager is willing to take a bet on some of these people, which I think is a miss because there's just incredible talent.
What's the reason why?
A lot of folks have been used to, like, you always hire from the same schools in the US. You hire people that where you understand their resume. When you're navigating a new country, you don't necessarily understand what is the quality of one school versus another. So to me, that's one of the reasons, at least for France, I know the French system. So I know the quality of each of the business schools, the engineering schools. So it's very easy for me to hire talent fresh out of college. However, when we started hiring in Mexico, I didn't understand the Mexican universities that same way. So what we ended up doing is we hired a Mexican hiring manager. That took a lot of time to find the right person, but now we trust this person to understand the Latin American landscape a lot better, and he is then able to source the right kind of people. So it's kind of like a double investment, right? We invested in someone who turned out to be absolutely amazing, and that person is now sourcing incredible people from those regions. But like having someone who knows the landscape is critical to make this happen.
MadKudu has an in-house team, which is a big decision for tech industry. What led you to prioritize an in-house approach over outsourcing?
I think there's a couple things for us. Our IP resides in understanding of what we're solving for and some of the tech that we're building. We have used outsourced teams for very specific components, but when we're thinking about designing the core interfaces and the core of the product, that is something that we want to own. We've thought about how do we create clear interfaces between different parts of the product so that we can actually outsource some components. For example, building an integration with an obscure ERP. Because we have the right interfaces with our platform, we can actually have an outsourced team build that integration because they have clear endpoints to pipe the data into. So that's initially the main reason. Then there's like something a lot more pragmatic, I guess, is in France, there is a tax credit that you get when you have your innovation and R&D centers there. So ultimately, we have access to great talent there. We get substantial tax credits for all the investments that we have in engineers in a market that we understand. So that was one of the reasons why we didn't necessarily consider outsourcing.
What strategies have you employed to effectively manage and nurture your internal development team?
It's a good question, and it's a tricky one because we've tried a lot of different things, going from having very clear frameworks and clear ladders, which has pros and cons. I think then people are just trying to tick all the boxes to get to the next stage. I think ultimately it's about hiring people that match your DNA. And so if we are builders, like we want to build, we have a slightly different way of doing our product development cycles. I think a lot of companies have. So finding people that actually want to operate in that system is critical, and it helps nurture. It also potentially leads to some people just don't like the way the system is set up, and it's natural selection ultimately. So I think being very clear on how you want to operate and not deviating from the plan is important. And frequently see, and we actually made that mistake as well. As the company was growing initially, we tried to accommodate for everyone's desires and hopes of how to do things, which led to regress to the mean. Then you start having this shapeless engineering process that is a mix of a bunch of things and doesn't really have any edge to it. It's like going back saying, no, like this is how we want to operate. We are going to be remote. We have a development cycle of 6 weeks, and every 6 weeks we have all the engineers get together and work on shaping the next 5 weeks of development. This is when they do hackathons, where they do architecture. This is when they do all the thinking about how they're going to architecture either the feature or the initiative they're going to be working on. And then the next 5 weeks are just hardcore execution. It's a different cycle, but doing that and finding people that want and enjoy operating in that mode, I think is critical.
Reflecting on your business operations, are there specific tasks or projects that you believe could potentially benefit from outsourcing? And what criteria would you use to determine their sustainability?
The number one reason we would outsource or consider not outsourcing is how much context does it require? If you have a task that requires a very, very deep understanding of our landscape, our product, how we fit into the ecosystem, downloading that information to an outsourced team is probably too much. It's already a substantial struggle to get our in-house engineers to understand deeply our customers, what we do, that anything that requires that understanding, I don't think can be outsourced. Or if you outsource it, it's going to lead to a lot of cycles. However, when you're looking at things that are more generic, like building integrations, things that are repeatable, where let's say you've built an integration with some tools and they're saying, okay, I want to add like 20 more tools to be integrated to our platform. That's where there's less context that's required. It's more repeatable. You can find people that already have expertise in the system you're trying to integrate with. The only difference with what you've done in the past is now we have an interface that is this, and we want you to pipe the data in here. That's like the kind of stuff that I think works really well. And when you look at, even just from a cost perspective, it's pretty easy to make the case for it being cheaper using an outsourcing team when you look at the number of hours it takes to develop this, and you look at the opportunity cost of having your engineers work on something that could be outsourced when they could be instead working on building more IP or building something that contributes a lot further to your moat.
As we wrap up our conversation, drawing from your own experiences, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs or individuals looking to disrupt traditional industries?
The first and foremost recommendation is don't ever fall in love with your tech. You should always be focused on falling in love with solving the problem for your customers, but do not fall in love with your solution. I really hate it when people say that their startup is their baby, because it is very different. You have to be ready to pull the plug on the startup. And I think when you start talking about like babies, it like creates an emotional attachment to the solution, which shouldn't be there. You should be laser focused on solving the problem, but willing to switch your solution from one way of doing it to another overnight if that's what the market requires. That's probably the number one. And then I think the second one is building for learning velocity. Like whatever you do, always think about when you have multiple solutions to a given problem, find a solution that will accelerate how quickly you can bring learnings. Because ultimately, whatever you think is true, you will realize is not entirely true when you talk to customers. So the faster you can get in front of customers, the faster you can get customer feedback, the further away you're going to be from the competition. The only way to win, in my mind, especially in the era of AI-driven development, is gaining an understanding of the landscape faster than anyone else. That's like one of the core differentiators. And the third one, I would say, and this is like very specific, I think, to today and AI development, is think about distribution as a moat. We're pulling out of an era where there could be a technical moat for startups. And now we're in a world where it's fairly easy to build prototypes and like vibe code things that look similar to your product, which is just going to create a lot of noise in the market. And so beyond market expertise, the one thing that can lead companies to win and to exponential growth is thinking about distribution moats. How is your distribution preventing others from coming into the market? And there's a bunch of companies that are doing this well. I think the most common example is like Intel with their chips. Intel Inside, everybody remembers those ads if you've lived through the 90s. Their competition was like, we're going to work these deals with Dell, HP, and all that stuff to be the provider of processors. Think about who are the distribution partners who could accelerate that, as well as who are the agencies who can accelerate you. I think a company like Clay today is more on the go-to-market side. Clay is a prime example of a company that decided our distribution is going to be driven through agencies. And that is actually creating a moat because those agencies then get embedded and using Clay. They feel like that's the tool they want to use. And it's going to take a lot of effort from any of their competitors to have to retrain all the agencies to use this competitive product rather than Clay. And like those agencies are always going to default back to the thing that they know better. Thinking about moat from a distribution perspective, again, specifically for people who might be listening to this who might be more tech, like tech is very unlikely to be your moat. And that one, it's hard to hear. It's even harder to digest and to accept as tech founders, but it is really, really critical.
Great insights, great conversation, Francis. Thank you so much for an interesting podcast. I'm sure my audience will love it. And thanks for your time joining it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on the future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in the next episode.